Hi class, this is the first of the author lectures that we're going to be listening to at home. This first one is on Elie Wiesel, author of the book Night. What I'd like you to do is listen to the lecture and write down questions or comments you have related to the information on the Holocaust or Mr. Wiesel in particular. And then tomorrow we'll discuss these in class. So bring your questions and things that you need clarified so we could really understand this time period. Elie Wiesel, as pictured here in an early passport image. Elie Wiesel was a survivor of the Buchenwald concentration camp, in a time we refer to as the Holocaust. Holocaust is a Greek word that means complete destruction by fire. He was born September 30th, 1928 in Sighet, which is now part of Romania. In 1944, at the age of 15, the Wiesel family was deported to Auschwitz. Since the Holocaust, Wiesel dedicated his life in promoting the remembrance of that time and also shining a light on the modern atrocities and exterminations happening around the globe. This summer, on the 2nd of July, Elie Wiesel passed away at the age of 87. 10 years ago, a museum was constructed in Elie Wiesel's original home. The images you are viewing are at the front of his house and his courtyard. The house kind of surrounds the courtyard. And this became a very important place for him. At the time, some 10,000 Jews from Sighet, almost half the town's population, were loaded onto freight trains from May 16th to May 22nd, 1944. Ultimately, they were sent to Auschwitz. Only 1,000 to 2,000 of those survived, and while a few returned to Sighet after the war, the majority were spread all over the world. Their chances, being that they were collected at the end, near the end of World War II, were greater. Their chances of survival were greater for this reason. Now here's a quote from Elie about his house. "Before me, always, is the photograph of the house in which I was born. The door that leads to the yard, the kitchen. I want to go inside, but I'm afraid. I want to look at that house, if only from afar. With all that has happened to me, it is essential for me to remember that place." This really shows how important it was to him. He was locked up in ghettos, actually in and around his house. Additionally, just 2 days before he was rounded up and forced to live in a ghetto, Elie Wiesel went out to the garden and dug a hole in his home and buried a gold watch that his grandfather had given him, as a sign of turmoil and kind of protecting what things were coming to him. And at that time, they still didn't have the knowledge of what was going to befall him, but he felt that he needed to protect that watch. This next picture is a picture of young Elie Wiesel. We're going to talk a little bit about anti-Semitism and how this whole idea of extermination began. Well, anti-Semitism has a long history. In the 1800s, people began not to refer to nationality, but instead they began to refer to race. They even started ranking the races. At the top of the race chart was the mythical Aryans, a group that folklore says left India in the distant past and carried language and culture westward. A number of people took great pride in tracing their ancestry to these Aryans. At the same time, Jews had been discriminated against for their religious beliefs, and then suddenly it started to turn to race. Anti-Semitism literally means against Semites, a phrase used to describe the hatred of Jews. In the early 1900s, racial thinking became respectable and the attacks became more targeted. By 1933, Jews made up only 1% of the German population. Of the 250 Jews who were in government positions between 1919 and 1933, only 4 of those were Jews. But there was this myth in Germany that Germany was dominated by Jews. This myth was promoted by Hitler's National Socialist Party. And in speech after speech, the Nazis maintained that Jews were everywhere. They controlled everything, and they acted so secretly that few could detect their influence. This idea was absurd, but hearing the claims fervently and frequently stated, many began to believe this was fact. And this is how people began turning against Jews and following Hitler's belief system. Now there's much more to this idea, but that gives the background, the start. All of this is background for Elie Wiesel's experience. Now this photo is a well-known but rare photo inside Buchenwald concentration camp. Elie Wiesel is on the second row, last little face that can be seen in the light. Follow my cursor right there. I wish to allow Elie Wiesel to his memoir to speak for himself, so I'm not going to cover much about his struggle in this part of the life, and Wiz will be talking so much about that during the book and the reading of the book. Here is a more current photo of Wiesel. After Wiesel was liberated at Buchenwald, it took 10 years for him to be able to discuss the events of the Holocaust and the scenes that he witnessed. Originally, he was placed on a train of 400 orphans that were diverted to France, and he was assigned a home in Normandy under the care of a Jewish organization. At the border crossing, he was asked if he wanted to become a French citizen. He did not understand the question, and so he did not respond. As a result, he had no state until 1963. But he did master French by reading the classics, and in 1948 he enrolled in the Sorbonne. He supported himself as a tutor, a Hebrew teacher, a translator, and he began to write for a French newspaper. At this time, he spent much time in Israel, though his family finally immigrated to America in 1956. During the time he was living in Paris, he was encouraged to write by his wife and a close family friend. Even then, this memoir was still under development. The book Night is a slim little book, but it's heavy with content. Originally, the memoir Wiesel wrote was 800 pages and written in Yiddish. It was then edited down to 127 pages, and he was paid $100 stipend for his story. This image highlights the belief which guided Wiesel's life. He advocates relentlessly for those in need of a voice, those who are being persecuted, those being treated unjustly or with indifference. Wiesel created a foundation to fund and assist those global neighbors who are experiencing atrocities at the hand of other ethnic or political groups. He felt that this was his life calling, to speak out for others so that we should not be silent. He worked with people in Rwanda, Darfur, Sudan, and in the humanitarian work he received many honors: the Nobel Peace Prize, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the Congressional Gold Medal, Medal of Liberty, the Star of Romania, the Commander's Cross from Hungary. Additionally, he was also a professor of humanities at Boston College, City University in New York, and Yale University. Here we have an image that came from an interview with Oprah Winfrey. About 10 years ago, or maybe longer, she chose Night for a book club project. And this introduction immediately propelled an already famous book into this larger audience. Elie Wiesel was an advocate for learning and communicating and sharing experiences. There are people who confronted him with tantalizing stories about how he wasn't part of the Holocaust, or how his story wasn't true, or how he lied just to get the attention. Without any negativity about this experience, Wiesel held steadfastly to the idea of giving a voice to the story. And that's why he joined Oprah, and then much later on joined Obama at Auschwitz to share his experience in the place where so much life was lost. He did it to share a story of those who did not survive and for those who could not speak. And while we're reading Night, this is not the only memoir written in the style. You've probably heard of Anne Frank's diary. Maybe you've heard of Zlata's diary, or Viktor Frankl's One Man's Search for Meaning. There's also Naomi Benaron's memory on Rwanda called Running the Rift, or Console Nishimwe's Tested to the Limits, a genocide survivor story of pain, resilience, and hope. There are so many more accounts who have lived these atrocities. These are just a few nonfiction books that follow the similar path to Elie Wiesel's book Night. We read Night for the same reason we read any book on genocide, not to celebrate the destruction or the unbelievable atrocities, but to understand human spirit, human condition, and see the path to history for those who have lived it. For this reason, some of the content in these stories will be graphic. They'll be hard to watch. They will be hard to think about. It might shock and unnerve you. These are all honest reactions. In class, we're going to discuss the work of the author's style, the use of metaphor and meaning, and finally the role of memory in a memoir. Additionally, we will explore the role of memoir as a voice for many and narratives written as personal perspective of genocide. This is just a little bit of information on the background on Elie Wiesel and where we're going with this book. I hope you've learned a little bit so we can kind of scratch the surface and dig into the book, the memoir Night. Have a good evening.